Hello everyone, this is Colin once again. I'm making this video because I just finished Huston Smith's book, Why Religion Matters, and I wanted to do a video on my thoughts regarding it. Now, half of what I'm about to say will be directly a summary of his book, so there are spoilers, um, and sort of my thoughts on it. And then I'm going to talk about things that happened right after I read the book, which are directly linked to the theme of the book, which I found to be not only synchronistic but very meaningful to have certain experiences post reading this book. Now, I've never really done a book discussing atheism, or excuse me, a video. I've never done a video discussing atheism and the potential conflict between faith and theism and atheism, or faith and reason, as some people would call the debate. I've done one video on atheism, and that's where I presented my very neutral stance towards atheism, which essentially is I agree to disagree with the atheist position, but that doesn't mean that I, you know, totally hate atheists and think that they're insane. Um, I've always had friends that are atheists. I've grown up discussing things with atheists and feel that I don't need to debate atheists because I respect their position, even though I, of course, disagree with their core fundamental point of view, the lack of there being a higher power. I'm also a huge fan of, no, I shouldn't want to say a fan, but I accept science, and therefore I'm not like certain uh, extreme religious thinking people who totally take a crap on certain fundamentals of science. However, the fact that I even mentioned science as a criteria to getting along with atheists is sort of a good way to a good place to segue into the topic of this video, because Huston Smith brings up a lot of great points. The first half of his book is essentially where he summarizes the greatness of the scientific areas of study, so physics, biology, chemistry, etc., astronomy, and shows how necessary they are as tools to understand this level of reality. In other words, the earth, the cosmos that we live in. He, however, in multiple places shows how these sciences have been hijacked by certain individuals to prove an ideological point of view or a religious point of view. And he also shows how limited at times sciences can be towards certain subjects. So he's sort of like myself. This is where I agree with Huston Smith, where he says that of course science is necessary, but if we're talking about very key specific subjects, we need to acknowledge the limitations that are in these areas of science. He then goes on to say that it is totally justifiable for people, when there is a void that science does not tell us, to fill, one can fill that void with something else. So, for example, if someone is philosophizing about what came before the Big Bang, that is a pertinent question that people are hypothesizing about. Someone realistically could say that the person or the thing behind the Big Bang is God. However, if someone could just say we don't know, or rather someone could say I don't believe that a God started the Big Bang, but all those are metaphysical, philosophical hypotheses that one makes because of that void. One thing that, as a result of reading this book, because see, the thing is that again, as I've just said about myself, I've never had a problem with this union between theology and science. Um, I've never had an issue with this. Growing up, when I would learn about evolution, and I was still a Christian, I never felt that this was threatening my faith. I could see that there were people in my classes that felt uneasy about it, and I could see others, and these are like kind of like the potential rejectors of evolution, and the people who are like the potential heroes of evolution in my class. But I could see the reactions. Like one person would just go, "Yes, yes," just totally, just like head over heels for it, and then there'd be somebody else who would be really edgy about it. And I myself, my realization, almost instantaneously harmonized this new information. I synthesized it by basically saying, Now we know, and we have a window, a limited window, into how God got us from point A to point B as a species, and indeed the entire cosmos. I never had an issue with that. I quickly synthesized that information for myself personally. So when I grew up and I was hearing this debate between people saying, well, reason and logic versus faith, I just couldn't relate to that whole debate. And I would watch debates between people, and I just couldn't do that. Um, I couldn't personally step into that sort of arena because I just didn't feel like there was a conflict. And having recently been reading um, books by philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle, and reading books by Islamic philosophers and Indian philosophers, who, in some cases with the Greeks, started the trend of started using for the very earliest time these concepts of logic, reason, bringing proof and evidence to the table, common sense, and yet believing in a being or a concept that was so transcendent from our own minds, our own psyches, and then looking at scholars of Islam, whether they were philosophers or members of the Mutazilites or St. Thomas Aquinas or even Jewish philosophers and scholars. What I was seeing what I've been learning recently throughout the history of religion is that there are people who value using critical thinking, being open-minded, using reason and logic, but also believing in God and being able to harmonize the two. There's this marriage between the two. And this really hit home for me when I was looking at a comment here on YouTube from an individual who I believe was an atheist. I could be wrong. And the person's comment, this was right after I read Huston Smith's book. And this person said, look how crappy the Dark Ages were. Look how much, religion has held us back. Look how much science has advanced us. And look how, look how crappy the Dark Ages were. And I read that, I had this sort of epiphany. I had this sort of like this light went off in my head, and I realized that there was a fundamental issue I had with that comment. And the fundamental issue I had with the comment was, look how crappy the Dark Ages were. Now, granted, the Dark Ages were crappy for Europe. You had religious tyranny, you had suppression of scientific advancement, religion being used as a tool to suppress the masses and to wage war. And I don't think it's any surprise to anyone who studies history why there was a scientific revolution in Europe. The Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and then to why Europe is the way it is today. And here in America, we've inherited this concept, Enlightenment concepts, which is basically secularization and free thinking, etc. And I have no issue with any of that. Now, reason why I'm so specific about tracing that a summary of that particular history is because that is very specific. The Dark Ages was crappy for Europeans, but what about the rest of the world? And what you find by studying history of other places is that the Muslims, the Arabs, the Indians, the Chinese were advancing, and even Christians and Jews living in the Muslim Empire. There was this explosion of education and advancement that occurred in these areas. And what many of these people, and of course you can find specific scholars even in the Islamic territories that were not religious. I'll just say that so I can save people from going, wait, hold on. But in those areas, what was common about all these people, whether they were Taoist, Buddhist, Hindu, Confucianist, Janist, Muslim, Christian, or Jewish, is that they were religious people, advancing logic, reason, using those mental faculties that we have, and advancing science and philosophy, in mathematics, in psychology, etc. So yeah, Dark Ages were pretty crappy for Europeans, and as a result, we are experiencing the blowback of that situation. And as a result of that blowback, we're having the blowback of fundamentalist religious people freaking out about the sudden urge of secularization and marginalization of religion. Um, and this is a reaction. These are all, in my opinion, reactionary movements. However, what I am finding is that the history of our species, people have come together and have had this marriage of religion and science. Huston Smith talks about this. Karen Armstrong in multiple places talks about this. And in these books that I'm reading on these philosophers, they were religious people who used their faculties of logic and reason they were learning from the Greeks. And there's this transmission of this way of looking at religion. And when I've expressed these thoughts to my atheist friends and colleagues, they say that they have no issue with if religious people take this sort of path, this harmonization of the two. And in the spirit of psychology, because as you all know by now, I am very much into analytical psychology, or as it's better known, Jungian psychology. In the view of Jungian psychology, our psyches try to work out the union of opposites. And what I see is having faith, accepting spirituality, and this is something that even non-believers can do, accepting that there is a transcendent function in our psyche that opens us up to the wonders of the mysteries of the unknown. However consciously we wish to fill in the meaning behind those mysteries, that's completely subjective, but that is something that we can accept. Harmonizing that with the cold, hard facts of reality that we know from science and mathematics. And that harmonization can occur. And therefore, you don't have to have animosity towards somebody else. With regards, you can just agree to disagree. But you don't need to have this sort of open conflict. And in my opinion, that just really can advance us if people can remember this heritage of this union between reason and logic, rationale, and then having faith. Because right now in our society, we are being told we have to pick a side. We're being told this not just by atheists, really hardcore atheists, but also from hardcore religious people. Is you have to pick a side. You either have to pick our way or the highway. And as I've already established in another video of mine, I really just don't buy that sort of absolute mindset. I think there can always be a middle ground. And there has been a middle ground, as history can attest. But I don't know, maybe I've always been somewhat of an agnostic theist at heart. Carl Jung said that when studying psychology and the psyche, one needs to be an agnostic. Quote unquote. This idea that you have to accept that things are just unknowable and beyond our understanding, and maintain some sort of neutral mindset towards some of these topics. But I really think that that one can really look at the history of religious people, these intellectuals, whether they were the Greeks, the Romans, the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, and see that there have been this established, and still is, it's not died out, it's just being overlooked. This tradition of this transmitted tradition from religion to religion, from people to people, has been overshadowed by this grand debate and conflict between two absolutist sides that say you have to either pick these people or these people. I am simply illustrating that there is a middle point that one can join. And not everybody's willing to do it, and that's fine. But I think that if we can talk about this subject in this context, I think that would really open people's eyes to new possibilities. So sorry if this was really vague, but thank you all for watching. Peace be with you all.